Ford has produced some of the most iconic vehicles in automotive history, but not every model hit the mark. Here are 12 of the ugliest Ford cars ever made. Number 12, 1968 Ford Torino GT base model. The Ford Torino GT base model is one of those cars that promises much, but ends up being a total letdown. Ford tried to go for a sporty, classy look, but completely missed the mark. The Torino GT is underwhelming compared to other muscle cars, like the Pontiac GTO or Chevrolet Chevelle. Its exterior is plain to the point of being boring, with no bold stripes or aggressive features. Instead of standing out as a muscle car, it looks more like a basic family sedan. The GT badge doesn't do it any justice. It feels too ordinary. Under the hood, things don't improve. Instead of the powerful V8 engine you'd expect from a GT, the base model comes with a weak 288 cubic inch V8, offering only 195 horsepower. For a so-called muscle car, that's laughable. Some versions even came with a 6-cylinder engine, which made the car feel even slower. Acceleration could have been more active, lacking the power and excitement that should come with the GT name. The interior could be better. The Torino GT feels cheap and uncomfortable instead of a sporty, comfortable cabin. The seats are nothing special, and the overall design looks like something from a budget family sedan. The dashboard is plain, filled with cheap plastics and vinyl, offering no sense of performance or luxury. There's absolutely nothing to make you feel like you're driving anything special. In addition, the suspension is far too soft, making the car feel disconnected from the road. The handling could be better, and it doesn't deliver the sharp, exciting drive you'd expect from a muscle car. To top it all off, the exterior design could be better. With its full-width recessed grille and plain, smooth body sides, the Torino GT doesn't scream muscle. The rectangular taillights and odd placement of parking lights make it even less appealing. It's a car that tried to be something it wasn't. Number 11, 1974 Ford Gran Torino. The 1974 Ford Gran Torino is a classic example of a car that tried to maintain its muscle car reputation despite the times dragging it down. By 1974, emissions regulations had already started to take their toll on performance, and it showed. Though larger and supposedly more luxurious than the Mustang, the Gran Torino was a heavy, sluggish beast. The top engine for that year was a massive 452 cubic inches V8 engine, which in previous years had been capable of over 400 horsepower. But by 1974, it had been neutered to a mere 220 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque. This meant that the once powerful engine could only manage a painfully slow 0 to 60 miles per hour of about 9.6 seconds, nowhere near the image of speed seen in shows like Starsky and Hutch. Despite its size, the Gran Torino was far from the high-performance machine it once was. The engine was front-mounted and the car had rear-wheel drive. But all this amounted to was a large, cumbersome vehicle with trouble keeping up. The 1974 model had a mere 140 horsepower at 3,800 revolutions per minute, proving how much it had lost its muscle car identity. Design-wise, the Gran Torino could have been more inspired. New government regulations mandated larger, bulkier rear bumpers that could handle impacts at 5 miles per hour. These oversized, square-shaped bumpers sat lower than before and were joined by wraparound rectangular taillights, making the car look more like a tank than a performance vehicle. The front end received a similar update, with a larger, more pointed grille divided into 8 sections and a relocated license plate on the driver's side. Though the Gran Torino Brougham had a few touches of class, such as a reflector panel between the taillights and a stand-up hood ornament, this car was a far cry from the muscle car it once was. Heavy, slow, and burdened by unnecessary design changes. If you're enjoying this look at Ford's ugliest cars, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Number 10, 1978 Ford Mustang 2 King Cobra. The 1978 Ford Mustang 2 King Cobra is a perfect example of how far American performance cars had fallen by the late 1970s. After 1971, the muscle car era took a serious hit, and the Mustang was no exception. While technically still a pony car, many of its performance versions tried and failed to belong in the muscle car world. The Mustang II was born out of the need for more fuel-efficient vehicles, a far cry from the powerful machines of the past. Lee Iacocca, the mastermind behind this downsized Mustang, did his best with the situation, but the result was nothing to write home about. Regarding performance, the Mustang II King Cobra was weak at best. Even the top model's 299 cubic inches V8 engine barely managed 142 horsepower. The King Cobra version, introduced in 1978, took a sluggish 10.5 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. This car was far from the high-performance vehicle enthusiasts had come to expect from the Mustang name. Despite its lackluster performance, the Mustang II sold over 1 million units between 1974 and 1978, with even a Car of the Year award from Motor Trend in 1974. But that didn't change the fact that the King Cobra, despite its flashy looks, had a weak engine that couldn't hold a candle to other muscle cars. Its 302 cubic inch V8 engine made a disappointing 139 horsepower, thanks to harsh emissions restrictions. The 1978 King Cobra was the last of the Mustang II line before Ford tried to bring back the Mustang's performance roots with the third generation in 1979. While it had sporty looks, the Mustang II King Cobra was more about appearance than actual performance, making it far from the iconic muscle car it was meant to be. Number 9, 1955 Ford Fairlane. The Ford Fairlane, first introduced in 1955, is one of those cars lost in the shuffle of automotive history. Named after Henry Ford's estate in Dearborn, Michigan, it tried to carve out a name alongside Chevy's more stylish Tri-5 models. While the Fairlane had some redeeming qualities, it was often overshadowed by more popular Ford models and lacked the charm to stand out. Over the long run, it underwent countless changes, but none gave it an identity. The 1964 Fairlane, with its 427 cubic inch V8 engine that produced over 650 horsepower, is often remembered as the car's brightest moment. The Thunderbolt model was a terror on the racetrack, even making sub-10-second drag runs. But beyond the Thunderbolt, the Fairlane rarely lived up to expectations. Its early models were plain, uninspired, and needed more flair than other Ford offerings. And while the Thunderbolt stood out, other Fairlanes were underpowered, particularly the later models, which became bulkier and less efficient over time. The Fairlane's design fluctuated wildly, leaving it looking awkward and inconsistent. Early models were basic, and the later years saw the car grow larger, but not necessarily better. It could have been more stylish, and Ford's changes often felt like half-hearted attempts to keep up with the times. When the Torino replaced the Fairlane in the 70s, it faded into obscurity, a forgotten chapter in Ford's history. Despite its lackluster performance and design, the Fairlane did have some moments of interest, like the 1959 Fairlane Skyliner, with its impressive retractable roof. However, in the grand scheme, the Fairlane remains one of those cars with potential but ultimately didn't deliver. Number 8, 1960 Ford Falcon. The 1960 Ford Falcon is the epitome of a forgettable car, uninspiring, plain, and frankly underwhelming in almost every way. Powered by a lackluster 95 horsepower, 146 cubic inches straight 6 engine with a single-barrel carburetor, it was as exciting as a piece of cardboard. The Falcon's unibody construction, coil springs in the front, leaf springs in the rear, and drum brakes all around didn't exactly scream performance. It could fit 6 passengers, but the interior felt more like a practical transport than anything else. The Falcon was cheap, with a starting price under $2,000, and it got a decent 30 miles per gallon, which made it a sensible choice for those looking to save money. But when it came to style or power, it fell short. Its boxy design and basic features could have been more eye-catching. Even the engine was so underpowered that it felt more like a sluggish commuter car than something to be excited about. Ford tried to give it some flair with the later versions, like sportier convertibles and V8 engine options, but the damage was already done. The Falcon was more of a practical choice than a thrilling one, and it quickly became overshadowed by its more charismatic sibling, the Mustang. The Mustang used much of the Falcon's chassis and drivetrain, highlighting how much more successful the Mustang was. By 1971, the Falcon was a victim of Ford's neglect, fading into obscurity without leaving much of an impression. Number 7, 1988 Ford Probe. Ford Probe, launched in 1988, was a car that never quite found its place. Built on a Mazda platform, this two-door coupe aimed to be sporty, but fell flat in many ways. Powered by a modest 134 cubic inches 4-cylinder engine, the base GL model only produced 110 horsepower, leaving much to be desired for those hoping for some excitement. Sure, the LX added features like power windows and locks and offered an optional V6 engine, but it still didn't shake the feeling of mediocrity. The top model, the GT, tried to save face with a turbocharged engine and 145 horsepower, but even that couldn't mask the probe's lackluster reputation. It borrowed parts from the Mazda RX-7, but its overall image could have been better. The automatic transmission was notoriously unreliable, and while the car looked sleek from a distance, closer inspection revealed a cheap, uncomfortable interior. Despite its effort to look sporty, it still needs to deliver on the performance front. The probe's design and performance aim to compete with sportier imports, like the Honda Prelude and Toyota Celica, but it came up short in both categories.